Abraham Lincoln warned that the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. Would you like to know what's being taught in today's classrooms? Welcome to Say What? With attorney Mark Schneider and Pastor George Rosca Jr. They'll explore the issues facing children, parents, and society as a result of the public schools and the forces behind them. Say What is the radio program of Protect Our Kids, which seeks to inform and equip concerned citizens about the looming crisis in American education. So listen in as your hosts, Mark Schneider and George Rosca Jr., unpack the issues and organizations affecting our children. And now here's your hosts, Mark Schneider and George Rosca Jr.
Hello everyone, I'm George Rosca.
I'm Mark Schneider.
And we want to welcome you to episode 162 of Say What, where we talk about the threats to our children in the public school system, including the dramatic rise of anti-Semitism in education and by extension, our American culture.
That's right, George. Unless you're living under a rock, you've no doubt noticed the paroxysm of chaos and increasing violence that's happening on college campuses, literally throughout the country. There's hardly a college campus now that has not been affected by pro-Palestinian and Hamas protesters and anti-Semite sentiments increasingly being played out. And we want to talk about that today. We want to share some information that you're probably not hearing if you listen to mainstream media, because I think there's fundamentally two messages that are being given out. One that you might hear on conservative radio and networks, and the other on mainstream media. So we're going to point some things out, starting with what is actually being protested today. What are the students actually saying? And we've all heard the chants from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, although when students are questioned about what that really means and what those river and seas are, many of them don't even know the geography of the area. They don't know that it's the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea that's being talked about. Or at other campus demonstrations, you hear the chant, there is only one solution, Intifada revolution, which means literally take over the entire nation of Israel, or that the U.S. is an imperialist country. In fact, the U.S. is the number one terrorist, is another chant you commonly hear. But there are a lot of chants that the public, I don't think, is aware of, George, and we want to make our audience aware of some of those as well. Like, we say justice, you say how, burn Tel Aviv to the ground. Or how about this one? We don't want a two-state, we want all of it. This was reportedly a chant at Columbia University on April the 20th. Or here's one, and we actually have a video to support this one. Al-Qassam, you make us proud. Kill another soldier. And Al-Qassam refers to Hamas brigades. Or here's another one. Zionists are Nazis. And this is from a Columbia student, Kamani James, and I think we have a video clip of that one as well.
If we can agree as a society, as a collective, that some persons need to die if they have an ideology that results in the death of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, if there are people like that who exist, shouldn't they die? Zionists, they're Nazis. They're Nazis. They're fascists. They're supporters of genocide. Why would we want people who are supporters of genocide to live? I'm confused. Someone in the chat right now, should people who are supporters of genocide, should Zionists, aka Nazis, white supremacists, should they live?
And then finally, you hear this chant over and over again. Hamas, we love you. We support your rockets too. In fact, we are Hamas. You hear that over and over and over again. Now you have to think about what students are identifying with when they say we are Hamas. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then finally, how about this one? Here's a video from a woman at the UCLA campus who apparently doesn't like certain ethnic groups.
Stop. You're just a white person. You're a white person. Get out. We don't like white people. Oh. Free Palestine!
And the thing, George, that you and I have noticed is that a lot of the tents that have been set up in these now 10 cities on campus have the same look and feel to them, don't they?
They do, which I think really implies that somebody's buying a bunch of these in bulk and funding these students, because apparently a lot of these students have demands of certain supplies they need in their little tent cities. So it's interesting. They didn't really come well prepared with, funding their supplies, but their tents apparently are.
Which makes the point that these are not spontaneous demonstrations, that there are well-organized groups behind these that have been very effective in what they're doing. Now, we're all familiar with the boycott, divest, and sanction, what are called BDI organizations that exist on most leftist college campuses across the country, particularly at Columbia. They have their own group called Apartheid Divest, CUAD. But George, there's other organizations as well. For example, Muslim Power Change. And they put out a statement in solidarity with student protests at Gaza, and they garnered 190 signatures, including from groups like Black Lives Matter, the Council for American Islamic Relations, otherwise known as CARE, Gen Z for Change, Greenpeace USA, and, of course, an assortment of others. And then you have the American Muslims for Palestine, a national lobby and anti-Israel propaganda group that is part of the organizers. But probably, George, the biggest one is Students for Justice in Palestine. And this group was started by Hatem Bazayan, who's an ethics professor at the University of California at Berkeley, no surprise. And he's the force behind a 20-year anti-Israel, anti-Semitic movement that has taken place in the United States. It is nationwide, and he has organized chapters in a great deal of campuses across the countries. And Students for Justice for Palestine, it goes by other names, including Palestine Solidarity Committee and Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights, otherwise known as SUPER. And these groups regularly call for the destruction of Israel and the ostracization of Zionists at street rallies in New York City and other places that have featured violence against Jews, resulting in lots of hate crime convictions. Like-minded student organizations at more than a dozen prominent U.S. universities have issued statements pointing the full blame of the Hamas attack on the back of Israel. So we took a deeper look into Students for Justice in Palestine to see what they're really about. And when you go to their website, George, they have what they call the Written Resistance. This is their online newsletter. And you can read the posts there, and we took a look at a few of those. We don't have time to read all of them. But here's just an example of their position. And this is from their editorial board. We, National Students for Justice in Palestine, are honored by your comrades, talking about these demonstrations, in this struggle. Together, we will continue to dismantle the Zionist project and the U.S. empire from within. Glory to the martyrs. Here's another a short essay that was written in the same periodic from What the Paper Tiger Theory Misses by Rohan Shenoy. Quote, at present, the Zionist entity is intent on completing its genocide of Gaza, stamping out all life within the Strip. Church, we have to think about that a little bit, because the definition of genocide is the systematic and widespread extermination or attempted extermination of a national, racial, religious, or ethnic group. Our question is, where is the evidence that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people? Because if that's their objective, they're doing a woefully incompetent job. In fact, I've never seen in my lifetime more restraint demonstrated by an army trying to defend itself against attacks in its country that's been going on for years now. People forget that Hamas has been shooting missiles off into Israeli territory, not just for the last 6 months or so, but for literally the last 10 years or so. And what happened on October 7th was literally a paroxysm of violence against innocent civilians in kibbutzim and other areas. So I think Bill Maher actually put this very well. And he's not someone we normally agree with, but on this, I think he's right on. Here's what he said. Genocide is what Hamas wished it could do to Israel, but can't. And what Israel could do to the Palestinians, but doesn't. So true. And finally, a message from to the uncivilized by a person named Danaya Patel, who's with Action for Palestine. Here's what he wrote on this same message board for Students for Justice in Palestine. We cannot be free until we purge Western liberalism from our minds, until we begin to love our own and embrace our role in the collective struggle. If valuing human life makes me a terrorist, that is who I am. If it makes me uncivilized, I wear this title as an honor. These have definite Marxist origins to them. It's painted all over their website.
And the redefinition of words. To say that a terrorist, the definition of a terrorist is a person who values human life, that's ridiculous.
It really is, George. And of course, SJP is not the only one. You have college professors and, faculty members that are also part and parcel of fomenting anti-Semitism on college campuses. Sean Aaron, who's with the National Steering Committee and a member of SJP, has said that the idea is to appeal to people that know nothing. Vladimir Lenin had a term for people like this, useful idiots. And so many of the protesters on college campuses are indeed just useful idiots. They have no idea what they're talking about. Well, George, sadly, some Jews now are also, perhaps unwittingly, behind the organizers of these campus demonstrations. George Soros, who's a Jew, a billionaire left-wing investor, is one of the backers for SJP. He's been funding them for years, in fact, all the way going back to 2017. And he also took in $355,000 from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund since 2019. So there's a lot of different groups that are funding these organizations. George, here's the question. Why aren't students demonstrating against real authoritarian groups, institutions, and governments? You don't hear any demonstrations against Russia for invading Ukraine, causing tens of thousands of civilian casualties there, taking over the entire Crimea in 2014. Recently, there's been the government of Haiti has been toppled by gang violence there. No protests whatsoever about what's happening in our own hemisphere, in our backyard. What about the Iran-backed Houthis that are enslaving Yemeni citizens and plunging Yemen in what the UN calls the world's worst humanitarian crisis, affecting over 20 million people? Not a word from campus demonstrators about this. Or China's ostensibly genocide, which is the intent to destroy its 12 million Jaeger population through enslavement and forced sterilization. Not one word. And about Israel's right to defend itself, Jewish New York University professor Scott Galloway asked this question. 2,200 American soldiers were killed at Pearl Harbor. So that's about twice as many as Jews that were killed on October the 7th. And we went and killed 3.5 million Japanese, including 100,000 in one night. 2,800 Americans were killed on September 11th. We went and killed 400,000 people in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we were not accused of genocide. Why are the Jews? Why is Israel being accused of genocide? The UN also estimates that there are some 50 million people enslaved today, either through forced labor or forced marriage, across the globe. No campus demonstrations against any of that. So why, George, is Israel being singled out? And what's happening with the International Criminal Court these days?
Well, Douglas Murray calls the grievance competition is always leveled at the most freedom-loving and democratic countries on earth. The nations everyone is clamoring to get into, and never against the real bad actors in the world. So, Mark, you already mentioned Russia, Iran, North Korea, right? Nobody's protesting against that, against Islamic Jihad, wherever it pops up. I remember when ISIS was going on their beheading spree, right? There was no protest.
Nary a word.
And especially the modern day sex trafficking trade, which is larger than it's ever been in human history. So I think maybe, Mark, we should give some context about Israel, Hamas, and the Hamas-Palestinian support. So Israel is the size of Rhode Island, and it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And so, I mean, you compare the state of Rhode Island with all of the other major states that are surrounding. I mean, that's tiny. A 10 million population country, right? 73% are Jews and 21% are actually Arabs that can live peacefully
and are
within the state of Israel. But would it be possible for a Jew to live peacefully within Gaza? I don't think so.
Not only that, Israel is surrounded by 22 Arab nations. Not one of them is a democratic country. Jews are not welcome to run for public office in these countries, but Arabs regularly run for public office and win public office in the tiny nation of Israel. What about Hamas, George? This is an Arabic acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement. It was established in 1987 as a spinoff from the Muslim Brotherhood. It has ruled Gaza since 2007. Now, most people don't realize that. Israel actually left Gaza completely in 2005. There was an election. Hamas won, and there hasn't been another election since then. So they've been in total control of this strip of land. They are a designated terror organization, and they have been deliberately targeting civilians ever since they have been in power. Obviously, they put their own citizens in jeopardy by putting their military establishments, their rocket launchers, their mortar emplacements embedded in dense civilian populations. Their charter, George, maintains that Palestine is an Islamic homeland that can never be surrendered to non-Muslims, and that waging holy war to wrest control of Palestine from Israel is a religious duty for Palestinian Muslims. This position brought it into conflict with the PLO, which in 1988 recognized Israel's right to exist. And George, this begs another question. What about the Palestinians themselves? Aside from Hamas, are they completely innocent victims in all of this? Well, the truth is that, of course, many of them are, but many of them aren't. In fact, many of the people that were rampaging and murdering Jewish citizens on October 7th were not in Hamas uniforms. They were civilians, and they were videotaping their atrocities and sending them back to their relatives in Palestine. And various polls all state that 70 to 90% of the Palestinian people are in support of Hamas. So, and what about the word Palestine itself? Where does this come from? Was Palestine ever a country, George?
It never was. In fact, the word Palestine is derived from Philistines, a people of Greek origin from the Aegean Sea. They were not native to the Judea area. There actually was never a Palestinian state. Palestine was coined by the Romans as a failed attempt to strip the land from its Jewish roots. So Israel has actually inhabited this area of land for 3,000 years. It's well documented in history, going back to the year 1000 BC, with David reigning over the United Kingdom of Israel. Then there was the exile under the Assyrians and also under the Babylonians, the Persians, then the Romans came into control. And then there was a liberation under Judah Maccabee in 165 BC. But ultimately the Romans, after the time of Jesus, came in 70 AD and they utterly destroyed Jerusalem. And then we have the Ottoman Empire, really, that came and took control here for many centuries until there was, under the British Mandate and post-World War II, finally in 1948 when Israel was once again established and recognized as a nation.
That's right. And for the hundreds of years up until that point, when they were established in 1948, the area was a literal wasteland. I mean, Jews have always lived in that land, but there have been books that were researched and written by people going back to the 1600s, all testifying to the fact that this was a wasteland and that the only people that were living there were mostly Jews, some Christians, very few Palestinians during this time, right up until the time before Israel became a nation in 1948. Well, George, there's lots of campus hypocrisy going on as well. We have heard, and we've talked about this over the years now, this term safe spaces, particularly for people that don't identify with their biological gender. They've got to have a protected place, to feel welcomed, to feel at home. Well, that doesn't apply to the Jews now on increasingly college campuses throughout the countries. There's no safe spaces if you're an open Jew. In fact, a Columbia professor, his name is Shai Davidai, wanted to go on campus during the demonstrations at Columbia, and Columbia actually deactivated his card. He's a professor there. Professor Shai Davidai of Columbia University had access to his card deactivated by the university to prevent him from interfering with the anti-Semite pro-Hamas demonstration on that campus. Columbia University COO Cass Holloway personally appeared at the campus gate to prevent Davidai from entering. Davidai is an assistant professor in Columbia's Business School Management Division, and he happens to lead Columbia's Anti-Semitism Task Force. George, how is this different than what happened in 1938 in Nazi Germany when Nazis were preventing Jewish students from entering campus? I don't see a lot of difference here.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. Same thing. But who believes this stuff?
Well, increasingly, young Americans believe this propaganda in poll after poll, and we have data from the Pew Foundation that shows when it comes to beliefs like, who are the Palestinians, who is Israel, a third of adults under 30 say their sympathies lie either entirely or mostly with the Palestinian people, while 14% say their sympathies lie entirely or mostly with the Israeli people. So a big demographic difference between older Americans and younger Americans. Younger Americans have a more favorable opinion of Palestinian people than Israeli people. 6 in 10 adults under age 30 have a positive view of the Palestinian people compared with 46% who see the Israeli people positively. And finally, younger Americans are less likely than older people to see increased discrimination against Jews since the start of the war, but they are more likely to see increased discrimination against Muslims and Arabs. The question, George, is what is driving this? What is driving these beliefs?
Well, it has to be a worldview. And this is a worldview that has been propagated on college campuses for decades. And we've been talking about this worldview, and this is why we want to tie this all back into education. Because many people will be like, why are Mark and George talking about these kind of issues? Because it does come right back to what students are being taught. And what they're being taught on college campuses ends up trickling into the K through 12 education system as well. And that worldview is critical theory.
Absolutely. These sentiments are right out of the critical theory playbook. In fact, at a lot of these demonstrations and a lot of the written literature in support of Hamas, it talks about settler colonialism. This is the big buzzword now. Here's a definition of settler colonialism. That Western civilization, so that's mostly Western Europe, the United States, Australia, represents an ongoing system of power that perpetuates the genocide and repression of indigenous peoples and cultures. Settler colonialism includes interlocking forms of oppression, including racism, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and capitalism. Settler colonizers are Eurocentric and assume that European values with respect to ethnic and therefore moral superiority are inevitable and natural. However, these intersecting dimensions of settler colonialism coalesce around the dispossession of indigenous peoples, lands, resources, and cultures. And in today's debate against the Palestinian people. But George, the same view is being taken against America writ large. In this simplified, naive version of history, since Hamas and their Palestinian supporters are non-Eurocentric and militarily weaker than Israel, Hamas, regardless of its crimes against humanity, is by definition oppressed and therefore morally superior. And George, we see this being taught in today's public schools. California's ethnic studies framework is paved over by references to white colonialism, settler colonialism, key terms, settler colonialism, genocide, master narrative, counter narrative are embedded within the California framework for teaching ethnic studies. And then, of course, there's the 1619 Project, which teaches that America was founded in 1619, not 1776, that the Revolutionary War was fought to preserve a slaveocracy, that the Declaration of Independence is a fraud, that Lincoln was a racist, and that capitalism was invented by slaveholders. So here's the question, George, that we would ask protesters. What is the remedy for settler colonialism? What would your solution be? Undo everything? Starting from when? Are we going to have a year zero, like under Pol Pot in Cambodia? What comes afterwards? Who decides? How do you unravel all of this? How far do you go back in history to settle scores? Because even the so-called indigenous peoples migrated from somewhere. They didn't pop up out of the ground. We are all immigrants. Assuming European settlers never came to the New World, how long would it have been left untouched by other more advanced civilizations? It would just be a matter of time, George. So these are very naive views that most of these protesters have. And George, where these campus protests ultimately goes is anybody's guess. But we have only ourselves to blame and our educational system for the last 2 decades. That's who's to blame for this.
Well, Mark, probably that's all the time that we have for today.
I think we need to leave it there.
Yeah, there's a lot more to be said about this. But parents, we encourage you to find out more about all of this stuff, especially the worldview of critical theory and how it ties into this whole idea of settler colonialism. You might see a lot of these terms being used in your child's history class, especially here in California, Oregon, Washington, New York, Massachusetts, and other liberal states. But if you have any more questions, you can go onto our website at pok.org, and there's many videos, pamphlets, brochures that you can share. Please invite us to come and speak to your parent group. You can also hit the donate button if you wish to become a partner with our ministry and help us to continue spreading the message about parental rights and about the triple threat that's affecting our children in the public school system. Thank you so much for hearing and watching our podcast. We will see you next time here on Say What?
You've been listening to Say What, the radio ministry of Protect Our Kids, where they seek to inform and equip concerned citizens about the crisis in American public education and the forces working against our children. Join us at this same time every Saturday as attorney Mark Schneider and Pastor George Rosca Jr. unpack the issues so that we can better safeguard our nation's children. For more information about this program or Protect Our Kids, email the show at info@protectourkidsnow.org. That's info@protectourkidsnow.org. And join Mark and George right here next week at this same time for another episode of Say What.